في حلقة اليوم من برنامج الحوار وبمناسبة 80 عاما على تأسيس الأمم المتحدة، إلى أين يتجه هذا الكيان الدولي؟ نستعرض إنجازاته واتجاهاته مع كبار المسؤولين: المستشار الخاص للأمم المتحدة لشؤون المناخ سلوين هارت، والأمين العام للأمم المتحدة أنطونيو غوتيريش، ضمن سلسلة متحدون من أجل المستقبل الأمم المتحدة في عامها 80.
From peace and development to sustainable development goals, the UN has been a key stage for international governance and common aspirations. It's also become a crucial gauge to understand where the world is heading for.
Oh, congratulations.
Join us for this special series of interviews and discussions on the UN and the future of international governance. Hello and welcome to our special series, United for the Future. Over 8 decades, the United Nations has been pivotal in advancing global peace and prosperity, with climate governance one of its top urgent missions. As climate disasters grow more frequent and severe, the need for action has never been greater. Recently, I caught up with Sylvain Hart, the Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General of Climate Action Team. In our conversation, he stressed the urgent need to accelerate renewable energy adoption and build climate-resilient systems. He also talked about China's success in energy transition and called on all nations to commit to a low-carbon future. Let's hear his insights. Mr. Assistant Secretary General, what a pleasure to see you in Beijing. Sylvain, you've been having a lot of conversations with your Chinese counterpart. What is your latest takeaway?
It has been an extremely encouraging visit. Firstly, it is clear that China remains firmly committed to multilateralism and the Paris Agreement. China is fully invested in the success of COP30, and we're just a few months away from this really important and historic COP. Secondly, it is clear that the energy transition is accelerating in China, and 10 years after the adoption of the Paris Agreement, it is absolutely clear that the world now has many of the solutions that are needed to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement.
How much of a priority still the issue of climate change on national leaders' mind, and therefore, as a result, on the agenda of the United Nations when it comes to implementation? We see the world's largest economy certainly are having different priority at this moment. The latest national legislation putting out also suggests that, for example, undercuts of support for EVs and also renewables, and the list that goes on. And that's just one of those many examples. So can the UN, which is an intergovernmental platform, be able to collect itself despite of the fact the largest economy is not interested in it anymore, at least at the national level?
Well, climate remains at the top of the agenda of the United Nations. At the beginning of this year, the Secretary General delivered his annual priorities speech, and climate change was one of his major priorities. And he continues to engage with leaders. In April this year, the Secretary General convened this group of leaders. President Xi participated, Presidents van der Leyen, Presidents Costa from the European Commission and European Council, as well as leaders from all over the world, including leaders representing key groups and constituencies around the world. And there was one clear message: climate remains a priority for them. And we also need to look at what is happening in the real economy. Renewables have never been cheaper. They're the cheapest and the fastest form of electricity generation. Energy security for many countries, and most countries now, is access to clean energy, access to homegrown sources of electricity. And we're also seeing that many countries are really focused on ensuring that clean energy solutions can finally deliver the energy access that has been one of the greatest challenges that our international community has faced. Despite all the major advances in technology over the course of the last few years, 700 million people still lack access to electricity, 600 million in Africa. Renewables offer the best, and clean energy offers the best way of providing energy access.
Then the natural question to ask, why is it not there yet?
I believe part of it is political will, and we also need to understand that the renewables revolution is a rather recent phenomenon. So when the Paris Agreement was adopted, only around 150 gigawatts of renewables were installed globally. Close to 600 gigawatts of renewables were installed. That's about a 300% increase. China alone accounted for, I believe, over 300 gigawatts of renewables. So we're seeing this acceleration of the pace of the clean energy revolution.
How much is China's practice so far give hope to the emerging and developing countries that they can also be able to do it?
Well, if I were to just take off my UN hat for
Okay, feel free to do that.
a minute or so, and it has given tremendous...
You're originally coming from Barbados.
Yeah. It has given tremendous hope across the developing world. And when one looks at the new energy plans from a number of developing countries, they put this emphasis on renewables, renewables, renewables. Now, there's some aspects of the international financial architecture that need to change in order to lower the cost of capital for developing and emerging economies. And we need to urgently address these injustices. So, and I'll give you one example. Same technology, but if you are not an investment-grade economy, the cost, both for equity as well as for debt, is 3 to 4 times higher in terms of investing in a renewable energy product. The good thing is that once you have built your panels, once you have installed your wind turbines and your storage, you are no longer exposed to volatile fossil fuel products. But the investment, the initial investment, has a high upfront cost. And we're really working with international financial institutions and the MDBs to really address this issue of the cost of capital.
Climate financing, as you clearly mentioned, certainly is a big issue right now. And look at $300 billion by the year 2035 for developing countries. When is that necessarily going to come into effect, come into being? There were also earlier commitments financially by developed economies for the developing countries over the decades of debate at COPs. You know that. And it's so hard for those things to be implemented, always delayed, if not postponed. When it comes to climate financing, obviously it's about word made and word needs to be implemented.
Solidarity with the developing world is absolutely key if we are to address the climate crisis. And this solidarity starts with developed countries honoring their commitments as it relates to the provision of climate finance. Now, on the good news side, as I said earlier, renewables are now the cheapest and fastest source of new electricity. And if deals are structured right, the private sector can get the incentives right. Private finance can help to fill some of this void. However, we also know that the adaptation challenge is getting worse. Impacts are accelerating at an alarming pace. And financing adaptation in developing countries usually falls on the shoulders of the state. And public money will be needed increasingly more for the adaptation challenge as these climate impacts get worse. So we know that the adaptation finance gap is growing and growing. The UN Environment Programme issues an annual report called the Adaptation Gap Report. And every successive report has shown a widening of the adaptation finance gap.
We have already seen emerging economies speaking out together collectively. For example, at BRICS Summit, in a joint statement made by the leaders of these countries, 1.3 trillion US dollars a year for the future when it comes to financing. Now, once again, I know this is a grand goal. What mechanism do you think the UN could try to establish, or by working with other stakeholders, in order to get these numbers come true?
One of the outcomes that we know that they're working really hard to develop a credible roadmap. So we are here to support them. We're lending our support to the Brazilians and the Azaris to develop this roadmap to the 1.3 trillion. But it will require creativity. It will require innovative use of different financial instruments. But ultimately, we cannot lose sight of the goals of this roadmap, really to provide hope and a credible pathway to address the dire financing needs of the developing and emerging economies.
Some countries, their policies flip-flop every several years. How much do you see as the UN, as an intergovernmental platform, be able to deal with these policy uncertainties coming from individual national governments?
Despite what might be happening in individual countries, the global trend is clear. The energy transition is accelerating at pace and scale. So despite what might be happening in one or a few countries, the global trends are clear. And we're seeing the pace of the energy transition accelerate across the world. We're seeing clean energy increase as a share of the economies in all of the major economies. In China, and we're seeing this in the European Union, we saw this in the US, we're seeing it in India, we're seeing it in Brazil. So the global trends are clear.
How is the UN, whose credibility has been undercut by rhetorics these days over the past few years,
in supporting and facilitating multilateralism, the UN, meaning the Secretariat, because the UN is also its member states as well. But the Secretariat and the Secretary General himself, he will still be a voice of reason. He will do all that he can to convene, as he did amidst geopolitical uncertainties and divisions. And he will continue to use the UN system as is needed by countries to build capacity, to support their own national efforts. But ultimately, individual members of the UN, they need to find common ground even on difficult and complex issues. There's only so much that the Secretariat can do. Ultimately, it requires leadership, strong leadership from the member states. And President Xi said, once we enhance confidence, solidarity, and cooperation, we will be able to overcome these headwinds. And I think that that's a really good way of looking at it. Those that remain committed to multilateralism, those that remain committed to international cooperation, they have to stand up and be counted and demonstrate this commitment in very tangible ways.
The UN is going through a difficult time, a very challenging time. I see alongside from you. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Everybody knows that. On the one hand, it is the platform for governments, most of it in the world, to work together. But on the other hand, UN's credibility has been undercut by rhetorics, while at the same time reform is needed within the UN also to improve itself. So how do you see UN still as an important platform for future discussions on climate change?
When one looks at what we've been able to achieve, we might not have hit the goals of the Paris Agreement. The world was heading towards 4 to 5 degrees Celsius of warming. The first set of NDCs or nationally determined contributions or national climate plans have brought us down to about 2.6 degrees Celsius, still off track, but it has shown that with increased efforts, and we're seeing those increased efforts now, we can find solutions to solve this problem. Over the course of the last few years, we've had more attention given to issues of concern to developing countries, like the establishment and creation of the new loss and damage fund. So at times, progress will be slow, it might be uneven, but I cannot imagine a world without the UN, especially if you are a small country and you don't have a platform to defend and project your interests or your issues.
Someone who has been working for the UN on a very challenging task, what is your expectation for this platform? And you as an individual, how do you see its future?
I am hoping that it is used as a moment for solid reflection by leaders on the enormous value of the United Nations and for recommitment to its principles and to its values. We also need to connect the work of the United Nations to people. People must understand the value of the United Nations in their lives as they did in the early days of the UN. So I'm hoping anniversaries are often used as moments of reflection, and I'm hoping that there is a collective reflection, but also a renewed drive to ensure that the values and the principles and the objectives of the organization are given new life.
You're watching our special program on World Inside UN at 80. Coming up, insights from Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, on reforms toward UN's effectiveness and the Sustainable Development Goals amid global challenges. Next. Welcome back. This is World Insight, our special series, United for the Future, the UN at 80. I'm Tian Wei. While its contributions are widely recognized, emerging global challenges have raised questions about its effectiveness. Secretary General Antonio Guterres reaffirmed the UN's commitment to collective action, stating that it is not a la carte menu. He also noted significant gaps in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As the UN navigates these challenges, how can it adapt to remain effective and drive sustainable progress? Here is our earlier one-on-one conversation with His Excellency, the UN Secretary General. We have been seeing from the United Nations, you personally even trying to make the commitment and push countries forward in terms of Sustainable Development Goals. For example, about energy transition, which is so crucial. Mr. Secretary General, you and your colleagues have been working with governments to design the goals for the 2050, for example, particularly recently. How are we going to implement them? What are some of the consensus that you see among economies and countries?
No, we are not yet moving as fast as we should. We must absolutely keep the growth of temperature at 1.5 degrees until the end of the century. I think we'll have some overshooting in the next few years, so it's absolutely essential to limit as much as possible that overshooting and to make it disappear as quickly as possible. But the truth is that emissions are still growing. So it's vital to have a drastic reduction of emissions in this decade. It is vital to move into the progressive phase out of fossil fuels, and it is vital to increase the investment in renewables and the transformation of the economies and the societies. And there are two very important things that are happening in China. One is, of course, the massive investment in renewables. You reached already the target for 2030. And the second is the huge multiplication of electric cars, in which now you produce more electric cars.
You saw them on the road today, right?
Yeah. Having said so, China, because of the dimension of your economy, and because obviously you became, to a large extent, the factory of the world, China has also a huge effort to make in reduction of emissions in the next few years. And we trust the determination of China to play that role. At the same time, it is very important to say, and we saw it in President Xi's intervention in the Belt and Road, that green development is a fundamental objective in the development cooperation of China with African countries. And we see it again, the importance that is attributed by China to the sustainable development and to the green development as a fundamental vector of that cooperation.
We see as the world changes, there are different ideas as to how the earlier rules can be abided by and whether there can be updates of the global rules. But at the same time, more self-interest as well. For example, about this, what you consider as very crucial energy transition. We see different governments are having very different decisions, and sometimes the pace of movement can be delayed by one country's national interest, while their consensus can be harder to be reached. Mr. Secretary General, how optimistic do you have to be in your daily work?
Jean Monnet used to say he was not optimistic nor pessimistic, he was determined.
Okay.
And I'm determined to convince all governments that the most important national interest is to defeat climate change. I was in Shanghai. The secretary of the party in Shanghai was explaining to me that meaningful investment is already being made to protect in relation to the rising sea level. When I was in the Pacific, the rising sea level was a major concern. I saw communities that had to move from the coast further inland, with destruction taking place at coastal areas. Some islands might even disappear. So, I mean, we are facing climate change as the existential threat of our time, and the interest, the national interest of each country is to make sure we defeat climate change and we do not let our planet to be destroyed.
Mr. Secretary General, how would you call on the national leaders around the world to work with you and people around the world?
My biggest appeal is for peace. Peace is the most important thing in life. It's peace in our minds, peace in our communities, peace in the world. We see so many other parts of the world in which people are killing each other, in which destruction is, and in which people are suffering so much. Peace is the most precious gift, and we must fight for peace.
Mr. Secretary General, you see China has been confirming the reform and opening policy. Meanwhile, you also see this country has been working with the United Nations, bringing out global development, global security, global civilization initiative. How do you see the importance of continued success of this, what it considers as the largest developing country in the world? How much do you see the takeaways of China can be of reference to the global South?
Now, China was able to eradicate extreme poverty. China is still a developing country, but China is in the top performance of some of the most sophisticated areas of technology. And so I believe that to study what China has done, to learn with the Chinese process, is something that will be very important. Of course, no one size fits all. Countries are different, but it's an experience that all developing countries should study to see to what extent they can profit from that experience to overcome their dramatic development gaps.
And that is the first edition of our special series, United for the Future, UN at 80. And we are going to bring you more programs, discussions, and interviews in the near future.